Alrighty, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Zero to Hero seminar session number 3. Tonight we have Ben, and Ben is going to be giving us a presentation regarding how to do Nmap scanning, which is a pretty important phase when you're doing any kind of reconnaissance within penetration testing and red teaming. So without further ado, Ben, you want to go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, so I'm just going to start off. I'll just share my screen, kind of PPT. Anyway, so this is, if you didn't know before, the seminar Zero to Hero seminar series is kind of split up into two branches. One is the defense branch, and the other is the offense branch. I'm teaching the offense branch, and so this is the really first video of the offense branch. And so yeah, so for today, we are going to get into scanning. And before we really start off learning about scanning, I'm just going to go really quickly over some of the stages of hacking. Though before I even do that, I'm just going to say a couple things. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat, unmute yourself and ask a question. I'm totally cool with that. And if you have any feedback during the way, like, Ben, you're speaking way too fast, or Ben, you're speaking way too slow, feel free to also say that. I am getting used to this. Is like the second video I've done so far, so still getting the hang of it. So if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. Anyway, so let's get started. So yeah, there are really 5 kind of stages of hacking, and the first one is passive reconnaissance. And basically, this passive reconnaissance is um, really just looking at publicly available knowledge about your target. And so, yeah, so I guess the best way to explain the first two is you can group the first 2 stages into reconnaissance, or basically learning information about your target, right? Because the only way you're going to really be able to beat something is once you first understand it, right? So the first 2 stages, passive reconnaissance and active reconnaissance, both deal with that. The only difference between passive and active reconnaissance is that passive reconnaissance uses publicly available knowledge, basically stuff you can find on the internet, potentially LinkedIn, or just things like that. You don't really need to interact with the target itself to get that knowledge. The second type is, active reconnaissance. And active reconnaissance is knowledge you can only get when you interact in some way with the target. So, for example, an example of like passive reconnaissance would be if I want to, I'm just going to use the castle analogy. I think I'll often use an analogy, analogy of like breaking into a castle whenever trying to explain hacking. So I'm just going to use that here. If I was for some reason like a robber and I'm trying to break into a castle so I can steal stuff, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do some research on that castle. Who is it owned? Like I'll just go to the internet, go to Google or whatever, and search up who owns the castle. What security system does that castle use? If that's publicly available knowledge, things like that. Active reconnaissance would be me going to the castle grounds, not actually going into the castle, but just going around the walls they have, seeing, okay, what are the different ways you could get into the castle, right? This is stuff that's much more, you're really more interacting with the castle. This could be speaking to the guards of the gate, so on and so forth, right? This is much more active. So that's kind of the difference between passive recon and active recon. Third stage is exploitation. And so during your time of recon, you've hopefully found some weakness or some way to break into your computer or to hack the computer, break into the castle, whatever. So exploitation is when you use those weaknesses you found to gain access. And so this generally gaining access means being able to execute commands on the computer. Privilege escalation is basically increasing your authority on the computer. So generally speaking, or most of the time, whenever you break into a computer and like are able to execute commands on a computer, you're generally not going to be the highest privilege. So the highest privilege on a user, or at least in terms of Linux computers, is the root user. Users with the name root can do anything. They're literally the master of the computer. They can do anything they want. Other users that aren't root have fewer privileges. And so sometimes, depending on the user you are, sometimes maybe you can only read files. Other times you can read and write files. Some users can create different users. Some users can delete users, so on and so forth. So privilege escalation is basically you find whatever user that your exploitation got you to. Privilege escalation is basically using that limited authority user to get into a higher authority user and hopefully root. Post exploitation is basically using the privileges and the authority that you have on that computer to go to the next thing. So this could be, sometimes this could be pivoting onto other computers, sometimes other computers, but like say you have like this target and it's target A. However, you can only access target A once you have control of a computer, like computer B. So what you might do is you might gain control of computer B, and that might allow you to get to your target A. All right. Post exploitation could also be like using your new authorities to say download sensitive or confidential files on the computer, things like that. So that's what post exploitation is. Post exploitation is. Anyone have any questions before we go on to the next slide? I don't see anything so far. If you do have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat anytime. I was going to go on to the next slide. So, all right. So now we're going to get on to the actual beef or the actual meat of the section. So this session or this seminar class is going to be about Nmap. And so Nmap is basically a form of passive, or sorry, not passive, active reconnaissance. What it is, it's a library, a program that can be used to scan computers and identify what ports they have open. And before I continue with that, does everybody know what ports are? Because I know we went over kind of briefly what ports are in the Zero to Hero first class. Does anybody here not know what ports are? Because if you don't know what ports, this might get, a little confusing. So if you don't know what ports are, please speak up and I'll give a brief summary. Okay, great. So if you don't know what ports are, if you're watching this seminar series at a later time, not live, please go to the Zero to Hero first class. In there, I do give a brief explanation of what ports are. And so, yeah. So basically what Nmap does, it's used to scan computers and identify what ports are open. All right. It's a form of active reconnaissance because you are actually interacting with the computer. It's not something, you're not using your Google, you're not using your web browser to actually learn about the computer, learn about your target. You're actually actively interacting with your target. So it is active reconnaissance. Basic format of using Nmap. So using Nmap, there is a form with like clickable buttons and stuff, but generally speaking, we'll use Nmap as a command line command. And so basic format of that command is just typing in Nmap and then your target into the command line. And so two examples of this could be Nmap to some IP address. Another could be you don't need to type in an IP address. You could just type in a website name, that will work fine. So yeah, here are two examples of those. Any questions? All right, so Nmap ports. Whenever Nmap scans a port, there are a few different possibilities it will say about a port. So ports can either be open, closed, filtered, or unfiltered. If a port's open, and that's really the best type of port for hacking, you want to find as many open ports as you can. An open port is basically some port where there's a program or service accepting network interactions on the port. So for example, it's a great example. Say I have some like remote access service on my computer. Let's say I'll use one called SSH. SSH is a very common way of allowing you to like remote access another computer. So say I have SSH. That's going to be listening on a port. Generally, I think it's port 21 or 22. I'm blanking right now. It's one of those. But yeah, so if either port 21, 22, that will be open if SSH is listening on it. A closed port is a port where there's no program, no service behind the port. If you try sending stuff to the port, it's not going to do anything because there's nothing listening. A filtered port is a port that you cannot access, you can't interact with because the computer's firewall is blocking it, or is blocking you from being able to talk with it. So there may be some program listening on it, but you can't access it right now. An unfiltered port, and this is a little rarer. You only get unfiltered if you're using a special type of Nmap scan. But an unfiltered port is basically one that isn't blocked by a firewall, but Nmap can't figure out whether the port is open or closed. So now we're going to go over two different Nmap scan types. And so these are really the most common, the most general type of Nmap scans. So the first is the TCP connect scan. And so this is a default scan. If you want to type it in into your command line, you do nmap and then -S and then your target. And so what this does is it kind of does a normal connection. And so first of all, basically it's like a normal TCP connect. And so I'm just going to give a quick summary of what the TCP connect is. They're generally just in networking in general. There are two types of connections. Oh, sorry, I see something in the chat. Oh, 22. Okay, thanks, David. Yeah. So SSH will connect on port 22. Thanks, David. Yeah. So generally in networking itself, there are two different types of connections. Like when you want to connect it to a computer, there's two different ways you can. One is a TCP connection and one is a UDP connection. The difference between the two is TCP connections are very stable in the sense that if you, like whenever I send some data from my computer to another computer, if we are connected via TCP, that the computer I'm sending my data to will always make sure that it's actually receiving my data. UDP is a bit more unstable in the sense that if I send data via UDP to another computer and that data doesn't arrive, that computer isn't going to keep waiting to receive my data. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between the two. Some common examples is for TCP, if I'm downloading a file, I'm going to want to make sure I get all the data in that file. And so generally when you're downloading something from a website, it's going to be a TCP connection. However, if I'm saying like watching a TV show or movie on some video streamer service, that's generally going to be a UDP connection, because even if you miss, like even if I don't get maybe like a frame of the TV show or maybe some parts of the data, it's not going to really interfere with my with my viewing experience, because like missing like one frame of the TV show or movie isn't going to really make any tangible difference. And so that would be like a case where you would use UDP. Yeah, so that's kind of the difference between TCP and UDP. There are UDP ports on computers. However, as far as I know, those are generally not really used as much. And UDP scanning with Nmap just takes a really long time, and so it's really not used. So I'm just going over the TCP scans. But yeah, so the two main types of TCP scans are the TCP connect scan, TCP SYN scan. So the connect scan is basically establishes a normal TCP connection. And through that uses what's called the TCP three-way handshake. I'm just going to give a quick briefer on this. I won't go too in depth into it just because this isn't really a networking class or networking video. But basically, the TCP three-way handshake is a way of making sure that two computers are actually connected. And so what will happen is it's first like, all right, so let's say I'm a computer A and I want to connect to computer B. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to send what's known as a SYN or SYN packet. And so a packet, if you don't know, is basically kind of the building blocks of data. So if I want to send some text, like if I want to say send a file to someone, that's going to be broken up into chunks of data called packets. Anyway, so I'm going to send a SYN or SYN packet to computer B, and SYN stands for synchronized, so you're kind of synchronizing the two computers. So I'm going to first send a SYN packet to computer B. What computer B is going to do is they're going to first send an acknowledgement packet or an ACK packet. Basically, it's a way of saying, okay, I'm acknowledging that I have received your SYN packet. And then they're going to send another SYN packet to me as a way of them synchronizing with me. Once I receive their SYN packet, I'm going to send a acknowledgement packet or an ACK packet to computer B. So I know it's a little confusing. Basically, I'm saying I want to connect with computer B. Computer B says, okay, I've received your request. Now I want to connect with you. And then once I received their request, then I'm going to say, okay, I've received your request. That's basically the TCP three-way handshake. And so this is what Nmap will do with the TCP connect scan. It's going to perform a full connection to a computer's port, and then it's going to see, okay, is this port online? Is there a service listening on it? Yeah, so that's the TCP connect scan. Then there's the TCP SYN scan. And this is a little bit more stealthy, and this is a little more commonly used just because the TCP connect scan is a bit more, I guess, unstealthy. And some reasons for this is if I actually make a full connection to another port, that's much more likely to be logged on like target on the computer's network log, which makes it easier for say like cybersecurity defense teams to see that I'm like trying to scan them. And so what SYN scans will do is they will initiate a connection, but they're not going to finish it. And so basically how it works is if I wanted to do a SYN scan on, let's say, computer B, and let's say I'm computer A, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to send a SYN packet to computer B. If computer B responds, then I know, so if computer B responds with a with an acknowledgement and a synchronization packet, then I'm going to know that that port is online. And so then I can say, okay, so this port's online. However, I will not finish the connection. I'm instead going to send a reset packet or an RST packet to basically it just resets the connection. It means that the connection doesn't actually happen. And so it's a little less likely to appear on the network log. So no, it's a little confusing. It's one good way to explain it. Good example. Kind of like an example. Let's say an example would be like if I want to see if there's like let's say let's say I'm in a dorm or I'm just let's say I'm in like one of the big dorms and I want to see if one of the rooms are locked. Don't actually do this, okay? But this is just an example. If I want to see if like a certain door is unlocked, then the TCP connect scan way of seeing if a door is unlocked is kind of like trying to like scan your card on it or like actively pull down on the door handle, see if it lets you in. Okay, so that's you're creating it's a full like attempt to try to open the door. A TCP SYN scan is like nudging the door a little bit with your fingers, not and trying to see if it's open. It could be something like where if you have a door handle, you're like pulling it a little bit, but not the full way, just to see if the door handle gives through. Okay, it's a little you're not doing the full connection. It's basically a way of seeing how the target responds and then getting information from that. If that kind of makes sense. Yeah, so if you have any more questions on it, please let me know. I'd love to try to explain it again. But yeah, so that's a TCP SYN scan. If you want to use that type of scan, you can specify using the -S and then capital S flag when using Nmap. Another thing is that whenever trying to do the scan, you need to use sudo when running Nmap. The reason for this is because since Nmap is sending individual packets, it needs root privileges to be able to do that. When you're using the TCP connect scan, you're not focusing on the individual packets, you're just doing a normal connection request, and so you don't need higher privileges or authorization. So yeah, if you're doing a SYN scan, make sure to do sudo. And okay, so now we just got some additional Nmap options. First thing, and I'm just going to go through these. These are basically different flags or different options you can add to Nmap, to your Nmap command to make it have different behavior. So one of them is the -pn flag. And so what this does is it's going to skip a ping check. Basically what ping checks are is, generally speaking, like the default version of Nmap, if you don't include this option, it's going to first ping, like if you give it a computer to scan, it's going to first ping the computer to make sure that it's actually online. And basically what a ping is it's best way to explain it is, generally speaking, if you ping a computer and it responds back, then you know it's online. It's basically this very simple, very small packet you can send that is a way of seeing if some server or computer's online. However, some computers, I think especially Windows, they're built to ignore ping checks. And so if you have ping check on when doing Nmap and you're like scanning a Windows computer, it's going to look like it's offline, even though it's not. And so generally speaking, at least for me, I like to include the skip ping check option, just so you're not actually relying on the ping check. So yeah, so that's the -pn option. Then you have the -p option, and this is a way of choosing which ports on the computer you want to scan. And generally, if you don't have the -p option on Nmap, it's going to by default scan the 1,000 most common ports. It's not going to scan all the ports because remember, there are like 65,000 ports on a computer, more or less. And so that can take a long time. And so by default, Nmap will just do the 1,000 most common ports. If you do want to scan all the ports, you use the -p- option. If you want to just scan 100 most common ports, you can do the -f option. And otherwise, if you just want to scan like a custom range of ports, you just basically put that in over here. So an example is if I wanted to say scan ports 1 to 2000 on, say, example.com, I would just do nmap -p, then 1 to 2000, example.com. If I only wanted to scan, say, like ports 1, 100, and 1,000, I could just separate 1, 100, 1,000 by commas, and it's just going to do those 3 ports on example.com. Okay. Then you have -sv. This is going to try to scan a services version. So if Nmap scans a port and it finds that that port is open, there is a service listening on that port, it's going to try to scan that services version. Okay, and so this could be helpful, especially you generally want to do this just because learning a services version is going to give you more information about that service. It's going to allow you to search online to see if there are any known weaknesses or vulnerabilities on that service that you can exploit. One caveat about the -sv flag, though, is that it will, whenever you do -sv, it's required to use the TCP connect scan. And so yeah, so this means you are going to be sacrificing stealth for the services version. So something I like to do is whenever I'm scanning a computer, I'm going to first use the SYN scan. Hold up. I'm going to first use the SYN scan to scan a computer, find what ports are open, and then afterwards I'm going to do a second Nmap scan using the -sv flag and just scanning those ports itself. And then it's going to look at those versions. So it's not going to be doing all the port numbers with the TCP connect scan. It's just going to be doing it with the TCP SYN scan. Yeah. So then you have another option called -o. This is a way of determining, okay, I've actually mistyped that. Let me, oh, okay, accidentally exited a screen share. My bad. Hold up, let me actually fix something real quick. All right, great. So, all right, sorry about that. Just needed to make a quick fix. I said it first said -o was used to detect the services version. That's wrong. It's used to detect the computer's OS or operating system. So an operating system could be Windows, could be Linux, so on and so forth. -o is going to help you try to detect what that computer's operating system is along with its version. Its version will not always be 100% correct. Nmap is doing an educated guess. It doesn't always know for certain. So yeah, don't always rely super heavily on the OS version, but generally speaking, this can give you a rough estimate. One caveat about -o though is that Nmap needs to scan both an open and a closed port to be able to get the computer's OS. And so what this means is that, for example, if I have a computer and I know only ports 1, 2, and 3 are open, and then if I scan that computer using the -p option, just specifying 1, 2, and 3, and then doing -o, it's only going to be scanning open ports, and there won't be any closed ports that it's scanning. And so that means that this -O option isn't going to work. So that's just one thing you should keep in mind whenever you want to use the -O option. Make sure that you're scanning a closed port as well. All right, so some more Nmap options. These are going to be allow you to determine the speed of your scan and scripts. So -T is used, sorry about that. All right, -T is used to specify your scan speed, or like how fast Nmap is scanning. You can basically specify a number from 0 to 5. -T0 is going to be your slowest scan. -T5 is going to be your fastest. -T0 or 1, it's kind of best in real life when you don't want the computer you're scanning to know that you're scanning it. Those are definitely much more sneakier. I believe -T1 or -T0, I'm not sure which, is like 5 minutes between each like port scan. So it takes a very long time. But yeah, it's a lot more sneakier. -T4 is kind of the best way to go whenever you are doing a competition environment, or you're just working on a practice box or a practice computer that you're trying to hack. -T4 is definitely the way to go. -T5 generally isn't the best way to go, just because sometimes it's going too fast and might miss some ports. So yeah, generally when you're in competitions, when you're just learning and practicing on a box, -T4 should be good. Yeah, so then you have the script option. So Nmap comes with a list of scripts that allow to perform different types of behavior. If you install Nmap, you generally find it in this directory in Linux. It's going to be the USR and then share Nmap and scripts. So if you go to this directory in Linux, you're going to find the different scripts that Nmap can run. And so let's say there's some script called I don't know, scan.nse. NSE is going to be the like file extension of all the different scripts. So if I want to run that script, I can just add the command to Nmap, -s script equals to scan.nse. If you want to run the default scripts, so Nmap for each scan, or actually for each scan, but also each service it finds, it has certain default scripts it can run corresponding to that scan and that the services you find. So if you just want to run the default scripts, you can just add the you can just add the -sc flag to Nmap, and that will run the default scripts. All right, so I think this is one of our getting close to the end. So if you ever want to like save the results you get from Nmap onto a file on your computer, there are a couple different options you can do. If you just want to save your results to like a normal text file, this is going to be preserved the exact same way Nmap outputs it to you. You can use the -on and then include your file name. Yeah, if you want to save it in a greppable format, and kind of what this means is, I believe this was gone over in the first zero to hero seminar class. But basically, grep is a command in the Linux command line that allows you to scan a bunch of text and look for a certain word. And so what Nmap will do, if you save it in a greppable format, it basically saves the format in such a way that if you grep the file for a certain service or a certain port number, something like that, when you grep it, it's gonna make sure that all the information you want appears in the grep command. And so kind of what that means is, what I mean by that is grep generally, like if I give it a bunch of text and I say grep, some word, it's only going to output the line of text that contains that word. Now, with the thing with Nmap is, generally speaking, you'll have all your information separated by lines. So if you'll first have like your IP address or your computer, and then all the ports separated along with the service versions. However, and so that can be kind of unhandy if you're wanting to quickly grep a file, because let's say I'm looking for a computer that I scanned that has a certain service. Well, if I use a normal output and I grep the name of that service, it's just going to return the port number basically along with the name of the service. It's not going to return the IP address of that computer because the IP address of the computer with that service isn't on the same line as the name of the service I'm grabbing for. All right. So basically -OG, it saves all the content in a way that has a lot of content squished into like one line. And so it kind of makes it easier for you to get information quickly if you're using grep. Yeah. If you want to save your results into an XML file, you can use -OX. If you'd like to save if you'd like to save your content to all three of these types of files, a text file, a greppable format file, and an XML format file, then you just use -OA with the file name, and it's going to create three files with the same name. All right, so that's pretty much it for Nmap. I just wanted to quickly go over some common ports because these are ports you're certainly going to see quite often whenever you are scanning computer. So I just wanted to go over a couple of these real quick. First port is the FTP port. All right, and so this is generally speaking on port number 21. These services over here. So yeah, this column is all services. These are all port numbers corresponding to those services, and then description of those services. These services they do not have to be on these port numbers, but these are the default port numbers for those services. Yeah, so the first service is FTP or File Transfer Protocol. Basically, this is a way of transferring files. It's pretty insecure. I believe it's unencrypted, so it's insecure, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, so that's file transfer protocol. That's port number 21. Then you have SSH or secure shell. That's on port number 22. This is very secure. It's encrypted. It's a way of remote accessing another computer and being able to run commands on it. Then you have the Hypertext Transfer Protocol or HTTP. This is on port 80. And so this protocol is basically what powers websites. So if you go onto, like if you type google.com onto your web browser is going to contact some server that hosts Google, and Google is going to be hosted from port 80. So if you type google.com and then added a colon and said like port 80, specified port 80 on your web browser, it would give you the same thing. Okay, so websites are almost always hosted out of port 80. Port 443 is pretty much the same thing. However, instead of HTTP, it's HTTPS. This is the secure version. And so, yeah, port 80, port 443, those are very common. Yeah, and so those are generally used for websites. Port 445 is generally with SMB. SMB is another file transfer type protocol. I believe it's specifically with Windows. I might be wrong about that, but you'll definitely see it a lot in Windows if they have file transfer type stuff. SMB also allows you to share things like printers, different things like that. Then you have remote desktop protocol, and that's corresponding to port 3389. That's basically a way of logging into a computer, being able to like actually see visually the computer. So like you're not just typing commands on a command line, but you actually get to see the desktop, you get to open windows, click buttons, different stuff like that. So that's remote desktop protocol. And yeah, so these are this some very common ports. There are a lot more ports out there, but these are some of the most common. And I basically copy and pasted this table from a website called TryHackMe. TryHackMe is a great website. If you want to learn how to hack, I really highly recommend it. You do need a subscription for most of their content. However, it's very worth it. But yeah, actually, I will say that pretty much most, if not all, of the content in this slideshow and most of the slideshows I will do in the future will be from TryHackMe. I only just posted this URL because I directly copied and pasted. But yeah, most of the content is from TryHackMe. TryHackMe goes through a lot more than I will go through. I kind of give a more of an abridged version or cheat sheet version. But yeah, and so I think that's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, yeah. So all right. So one question is, how do you decide what port to hack into? Yeah, so that's a good question. How do you decide what port to hack into? And so basically, with this, I'll give some background information. Um, Basically, kind of something I mentioned earlier in the presentation was that using Nmap and scanning is part of the enumeration phase or the reconnaissance phase of hacking. This is basically the time where you get as much information about the target as possible. And so typically when you're scanning a computer for ports, you're basically looking for ports that have services running behind it, right? Open ports. And depending on that service and on the versions of those services, some services may have like vulnerabilities or exploits that basically allow you to gain authorization or like remote control access to a computer. And so basically, generally, one common part of just hacking in general is when you scan a computer, you're going to see what services are open. You're going to see what versions they have if you use the -sv option with Nmap. Then what you're going to generally want to do is you're going to search up those services. You're going to search up those version numbers with that service and see if there's any exploits or vulnerabilities online. So you can use Google for this. There's lots of different ways you can search it up. I'm probably going to go into that in a future video, like some good places to look that up. But yeah, so basically, you can't just like hack into any port arbitrarily. You need to find a port whose has a like weak or vulnerable service. And so basically scanning is a way of getting information, what service is on there, what version it is, and that allows you to determine if that service is vulnerable. Does that kind of make sense?
And I guess just to piggyback off of that, as as you do more penetration testing, you'll kind of get the hang of and you'll kind of learn kind of what you're going to want to be looking for. So for instance, if you were facing a machine and it had port 22 open, which is SSH, nowadays it's pretty secure. You're going to be pretty unlikely to find something. But if you start to see older versions, that might be something that you might try to find some sort of exploit for it. Otherwise, you'll just be doing brute force, generally speaking. But like I said, as you kind of learn your penetration testing skills, you'll kind of start to see, okay, well, it's port 80. Automatically, you're generally going to know that that's some set of website. I'm going to use this tactic with that website, or you'll start to see some other stuff too. So it just kind of comes with practice. And as we go through the semester with these zero to hero sessions, you'll start to kind of see that kind of bear fruit as well.
Okay. So another question is, what resources do you guys recommend to follow up? So I don't think I have any resources specifically for this topic. However, there are definitely like resources for hacking in general that I do have. I believe John has created like a big post in the CyberHawks Discord containing a bunch of resources. So I definitely check out that. Um, yeah, if you definitely want to go into more of this type of stuff and mapping, um, I definitely recommend getting a Try Hack Me subscription. They do go into a lot more stuff. Yeah, so DZM security, Try Hack Me, that's John posted that in the chat. Those are both great options. Try Hack Me does go kind of very deep into some Nmapping, into some Nmapping, a little too complex in some things, I think, but yeah, definitely goes deep into Nmapping. So yeah, definitely check out Try Hack Me.
Any other questions for Ben? And feel free to reach out to us afterwards if you come up with a question that you're like, hey, I wish I'd asked that. Or I guess to kind of plug, later in the week I'll be doing office hours, or open hours. Office, I don't know what to call it yet, but I'll be doing just like an open session where people can kind of drop by if there was something that you saw interesting in something like this session, or for people who maybe missed this session and want to kind of do a little bit more practice or something like that. or to kind of just grow off of it. We can do pretty much anything during those sessions. I haven't selected a time yet. I think I've only had one person fill out. Yeah, I've only got one person who suggested Friday. I'm gonna re-throw out that tomorrow afternoon to kind of ask for more input on when we'll hold those. So that's just kind of as a heads up there. But
One
any
other
questions?
thing,
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
yeah, so we weren't able to do it today. However, I am thinking of in next time I run a seminar video, which will be in 2 weeks, most likely, of kind of explaining and how to install your own Kali Linux virtual machine onto your computer. And so I was just curious if anybody in here is interested in that. If people are, then I will do that. And so I was just interested if you guys could give a quick like thing in the chat saying whether or not you'd be interested in that. If people are, then I'll definitely go over that in the next time I do a video or presentation. But yeah, so I'm just interested if anyone's interested in that. Kind of the difference between that would be right now, David and John did a great job of like setting up Proxmox and like virtual computers on online, and so you can use those via website, and so those are great. However, generally speaking, most people, at least once you get into like professional industry and stuff, people are going to be having virtual machines on their own computers, running with their own RAM and stuff like that, and so it's just there's not really, I guess in the future, I guess if you get better at it, you want the virtual machine. Um, but yeah, so there's at least for now, there's no better or worse version. I'm just curious if anyone would be interested in that.
Well, we'll probably do a poll in the
Yeah.
on the CyberHawks Discord just in case there's people who aren't here. But we'll take a look. Yeah, I think I do think it'd be pretty valuable. Ben, we'll talk about it offline. We may also we may make that like a video that will release asynchronously. And the main reason for that is sometimes these takes like a long time to set up. So,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like for instance, like we're downloading like an image or something like that, and it makes it very difficult for like people to keep up. So like we're like, here, go download this 4 GB ISO or VMTK file and try and keep
Now
up
here
while
are
we're then.
instructions on how to install it.
So keep an eye out for it. We'll probably release a video and be like, okay, we'll rejoin you when it's downloaded, or we'll rejoin you when it's actually installed, the 2 hours later. But yeah, so I'll talk to Ben about it and we'll see kind of what we want to do for that. All right. Any final questions before we wrap up for this evening? All righty. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We'll have another session next week. We'll alternate. So next week is going to be Nick. He'll be doing some sort of defense related activity. I have to check in with him to see what we're doing next week. And then the week after him will most likely be Ben again. So stick around, keep an eye out for those open hours, keep an eye out for stuff in pen testing corner with John. So just keep an eye out for all of our activities. If you have not already, we are hosting an internal competition later on this semester near November 18th. So it'd be really awesome if people that are interested in either testing out their skills or they want to at least kind of see what a competition is like in a super low stakes, low stress environment. Feel free to sign up for that. The sign up form is in the Discord server. So feel free to go ahead and do that. And we look forward to kind of hosting that later on this semester.